How do you like the Tony Allen comparisons?
I feel like I'm a little better than Tony Allen, but hopefully I can get compared to someone better.
Travis Demetrius Leslie, born March 29, 1990. Back in 2011, Travis Leslie walked into the NBA draft process believing he was destined for more than just being a defender. Even when scouts compared him to Tony Allen, a player who would eventually become one of the greatest perimeter defenders of his generation, Leslie laughed the comparison off. He openly said he hoped to be compared to somebody, quote, better. At the time, maybe it didn't sound crazy. Travis Leslie was one of the best athletes in basketball. Explosive first step, violent dunks, NBA body, and highlight reel athleticism before social media really turned players into daily mixtape celebrities. In some ways, he almost looked like a prototype for the kind of explosive two-way guard fans would later compare to Anthony Edwards. The problem was the NBA didn't need Travis Leslie to become a scorer. It actually needed him to become Tony Allen. And ironically, the role he seemed to look down on eventually became the exact role he couldn't earn. Because while Tony Allen carved out a 14-year NBA career through defense, toughness, effort, and embracing who he was as a player, Travis Leslie lasted just 10 games in the league before disappearing overseas and minor leagues for the rest of his basketball journey. And looking back now, that draft interview almost feels less like confidence and more like a warning sign. What happened? Let's talk about it. Salute to L Selector on IG for this request. It's your boy JC Stunted Growth. Let's get it. Like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know who I should do next. Travis Leslie was a 6'4" shooting guard from Atlanta, Georgia, who entered basketball with the kind of athleticism most players spend their entire lives chasing. Long before vertical tests and mixtapes became daily social media content, Leslie was already being talked about as one of the best pure athletes in basketball. At Columbia High School in Decatur, he became a McDonald's All-American nominee and one of the top players in the state before committing to the University of Georgia. Once he arrived there, his explosiveness immediately stood out. Whether it was putback dunks, chase down blocks, or transition finishes, Leslie looked like the type of athlete the NBA always found room for. By his junior year, he averaged 14 points and nearly 8 rebounds, while becoming known as one of the most exciting players in the SEC, even though a slightly down year from his sophomore season. Around that time, scouts started projecting him as a possible late first-round pick because of his defensive upside, motor in transition, and physical tools. But during the draft process, questions started to surface about everything outside of his athleticism. His shooting consistency, ball handling, overall offensive polish, and even his motor became talking points. Still, Leslie believed his ceiling was much higher than the role player comparisons he was receiving entering the NBA draft. Stunt number 1, he never embraced the blueprint. When Travis Leslie entered the NBA, the league already had a very clear idea of what kind of player he could become with his length and athleticism, along with what the demand was at the time. Teams saw an explosive athlete with defensive upside, elite transition ability, and the physical tools to guard multiple positions. In many ways, the blueprint was already sitting right in front of him. The NBA didn't necessarily need Leslie to become a 20-point-per-game scorer. It needed him to become an elite role player who could defend, brought energy, and master all the little things winning teams value. But Leslie seemed to view himself differently. Instead of fully embracing the defensive specialist role scouts envisioned for him, Leslie still appeared focused on proving he had much more offensive upside than people believed. During the draft process, he openly talked about improving his shooting and ball handling, while saying he hoped to eventually be compared to someone better than Tony Allen. It almost feels like he didn't just underestimate how valuable the Tony Allen archetype actually was, but he laughed at it. That mattered because second-round picks rarely get years to slowly figure themselves out offensively. Players drafted outside the lottery usually survive by mastering one NBA skill immediately. Tony Allen understood that early in his career. He accepted being a defender, hustle player, and energy guy, even without a polished offensive game. Leslie, meanwhile, entered the league still trying to grow into something bigger offensively, while never fully dominating the role teams already believed he could succeed in. At the same time, concerns about his overall approach followed him into the league. Scouts questioned his consistency and motor before the draft, and Leslie himself admitted some people viewed him as nonchalant on the court. He also admitted that he didn't really work on his legs much because his jumping ability came naturally. None of those comments automatically mean a player will fail, but they did reinforce the idea that Leslie relied heavily on natural athleticism instead of completely embracing the grind and urgency role players often need to survive. And unfortunately for him, the offensive leap he believed would eventually come never developed quickly enough. Meanwhile, the defensive blueprint sitting in front of him from the very beginning became the exact role that could have potentially extended his NBA career for years. Stunt number 2, his offensive game never developed fast enough. Even though Travis Leslie was one of the most explosive athletes in basketball entering the 2011 NBA draft, the league quickly exposed how raw the rest of his offensive game still was. In college, Leslie could overwhelm defenders with pure speed, elevation, and transition play. He didn't always need advanced shot creation or polished scoring instincts because his athleticism alone created advantages players simply couldn't match. But once he reached a professional level, that gap disappeared fast. Suddenly, everybody was athletic. The NBA forced him into half-court situations where raw explosiveness mattered far less than skill, spacing, and decision-making. Defenders were stronger, smarter, and much more disciplined. The transition opportunities that once led to easy highlights became harder to find, and Leslie now had to consistently score against set defenses. That's where the limitations in his offensive game became much more noticeable, because in college, looking at the numbers, he never was a well-rounded offensive talent. His jumper remained inconsistent, especially from deep range, 30% from 3 in his final year, which made it difficult for coaches to trust him as an off-ball floor spacer. His handle also never fully developed into something reliable enough to create offense consistently for himself or others. At 6'4", Leslie wasn't big enough to simply overpower NBA wings physically, and because he wasn't a natural playmaker or elite shooter, teams started struggling to define exactly what offensive role he could realistically fill long-term. Ironically, Leslie himself seemed confident that those offensive improvements would eventually come. During the draft process, he openly talked about becoming a very, very good shooter while continuing to improve his ball handling over time. The confidence wasn't necessarily the issue. Plenty of players believe in themselves. The problem was timing. NBA teams usually don't wait very long for second-round picks to slowly develop offensive polish unless they already dominate another role at a high level. And unfortunately for Leslie, his offensive development simply didn't happen quickly enough to offset the weaknesses teams already saw. Instead of evolving into a complete two-way wing, he remained stuck somewhere in between. He wasn't skilled enough offensively to become the type of scorer he envisioned himself becoming, but he also never fully established himself as an elite defensive specialist teams could trust regardless of offense. That left him trapped in one of the hardest positions in professional basketball, an incredible athlete without a clearly defined NBA identity. Stunt number 3, the NBA stopped falling for potential athletes. Back when Travis Leslie entered the league, the NBA was already beginning to shift away from simply gambling on raw athleticism alone. Years earlier, explosive wings who could jump out the gym were often given longer opportunities to develop because teams believed athletic ability itself guaranteed upside. But by the early 2010s, franchises were becoming far more selective about which project athletes they invested real time into developing. Unfortunately for Leslie, he entered the league right in the middle of that transition. Even though he was drafted by the Los Angeles Clippers and briefly played alongside stars like Chris Paul and Blake Griffin, the reality was that contenders usually don't have patience for raw second-round projects. Teams trying to win immediately needed role players they can trust right away. Leslie's athleticism was exciting, but coaches needed consistency, shooting, defensive discipline, and dependable decision-making. Those are usually the traits that keep players on the floor long enough to survive mistakes. Leslie only appeared in 10 NBA games before quickly falling out of the Clippers' long-term plans. After that, his career became the path many forgotten NBA athletes eventually take, bouncing through the G League and overseas basketball, trying to keep the dream alive. Over the years, Leslie played in countries all over the world, including France, Lithuania, Australia, and Puerto Rico. And to his credit, he actually built a respectable international basketball career. Overseas, his athleticism still made him exciting, and at times he was able to put up productive scoring numbers. But the NBA is different from almost every other basketball environment in the world. The league constantly replaces athletic wings with younger versions every single year. Once teams stop viewing a player as long-term upside, roster spots disappear fast, and unfortunately for Leslie, younger prospects kept entering the draft with similar explosiveness while offering more shooting, more size, and more polished offensive skill. In many ways, Leslie became one of those players who looked like he should have lasted far longer in the NBA than he actually did. The dunks, the athletic gifts, and the flashes all looked believable on highlight reels, but lasting in the NBA usually comes down to mastering a role, maximizing opportunities quickly, and giving teams something dependable beyond physical tools alone. And by the time Leslie finally seemed to understand exactly what the league wanted from him, the NBA had already moved on. All in all, Travis Leslie is one of those basketball stories that looks completely different depending on how you choose to view it. On one hand, he still made the NBA, played professionally around the world, and built a career most basketball players could only dream of. There's thousands of elite athletes who never even got the chance to compete at that level. But at the same time, when people looked at Leslie physically, they saw somebody who appeared built for much more. The athleticism was real, the explosiveness was real, and for a moment it genuinely felt like he could become one of the NBA's next high-flying two-way wings. Instead, his story became a reminder that athletic ability alone only gets you through the door. Staying in the NBA usually comes down to self-awareness, skill development, consistency, and fully embracing whatever role helps teams win. Ironically, the Tony Allen comparison Leslie once laughed at eventually became the exact career path that might have saved his own NBA future. Today, Leslie's name mostly lives on through old dunk highlights, mixtapes, and flashes of unreal athleticism that still make people wonder what could have been. Because sometimes the hardest part of basketball isn't getting to the league, it's understanding exactly who you need to become once you finally get there. Salute, much respect, but for these reasons, his growth was stunted. It's your boy JC Stunted Growth, and I'm out.